Welcome back to Master Surveillance Mindset here on Northwest Digital News. Today we're going to be talking about the fact that there's nothing routine in law enforcement. Darin Fredickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here on the broadcast. This is actually a very timely show, Darin. We had a incident actually in our area where a deputy recently lost his life last Saturday night in a shooting situation, and he was responding to what was believed to be a disabled vehicle on a remote country road, and people might think of this as something as routine. Well, that's not the way things turned out. And we shared a little bit of the story with you, and you've had a chance to do a little background. Kind of your thoughts on, first of all, there's nothing routine in law enforcement.
Yeah, that's something I still remember going back 25 years ago, actually 26, 27 years ago when I went through the academy. They instill in your mind that there is absolutely nothing routine about law enforcement, that as soon as you feel like you're in a routine or you become complacent, that's when you're at greatest risk of being injured or killed. And there's a term known as like the routine traffic stop, right? Well, law enforcement spends a lot of time doing just routine things. There's a lot of just monotonous calls that are the same thing over and over and over again. Traffic stops are, you might do 10, 15, 20 traffic stops in a day. You just don't know. But as soon as you take it as a routine traffic stop or a routine contact on a disabled vehicle or a routine call at a home, as soon as you get that mindset, that's when you become injured or killed, because maybe you've just become accustomed to doing it a certain way, which isn't necessarily a safe way. The thing is when you're going out on a call, you don't have all the information on what is occurring at a scene. Just like a traffic stop, you stop a vehicle for a violation. You don't know if the registered owner's in that vehicle, if the son, daughter, family member, associates in that vehicle, and more so, you don't even know what just happened before. You might stop a car for speeding and not realize that they just robbed a bank, they just robbed a person, they just kidnapped somebody. You have no idea. So if you approach it like, oh, this is just another traffic stop, I do 20 a day, then you're not prepared for the unexpected. And it sounds like even the situation in your locality with the deputy, it was a disabled vehicle, kind of like a routine call. He went up there to examine or figure out what's up with this disabled vehicle, and it sounds like maybe it turned out entirely different.
There's a little bit of interesting background, and unfortunately this isn't the kind of information that, when you mentioned there's all kinds of things a police officer does not know when a situation took place, but they learned after the fact the motorhome was owned by the mother of two boys who actually have a pretty lengthy history of run-in with law enforcement. In fact, so there's two boys here. Is it Daniel and who's the other one? Brian. Daniel and Brian. So Daniel Butts was the person who was actually, a week ago or a little more than that, was just convicted 45 years for the shooting death of a police chief over in Rainier. And so this shooting incident happens a week after this conviction comes down, and it's by the brother, as it turns out to be Brian Butts. And there was an encounter the following evening with Brian Butts and local law enforcement, and he was shot and killed in that exchange of gunfire that happened here locally. So the person believed to be the shooter is now dead. But when you think about this situation, you've had a lot of experience with law enforcement over the years, and in a lot of different metro areas and that sort of thing, and you've got a family who's had some law enforcement run-ins. You had a brother who was convicted a week prior. This is all information that, if it could have been had, and unfortunately it wasn't, but when you think about a deputy approaching a scene with that kind of information available, it probably changes how they approach what you might think of as a routine call. Because for all practical purposes, as you said, this stop appeared to be very routine. What's going on with this vehicle blocking the road?
Yeah, it's all about information. The more information you have when you go into a situation, the better decisions you can make. And a lot of times they're going to change your decisions based on the information you have. So it sounds like the officer didn't have the information, and so he didn't approach it any differently because he didn't know to approach it any differently. I can, depending on how many years of service he had on, how many years was he?
29-year-old deputy, so probably
29, so
yep,
probably 10 years maybe, or 6 years. Okay. So 6 years of experience of dealing with situations, and most people don't realize officers don't get in shootings that often. Like for a law enforcement officer to get involved in a shooting, I did 20 years and 4 months. I never was shot. Fortunately, I was in a couple of really close calls, and I never shot anybody. I never fired my weapon in the line of duty. And so for him, this is most likely his first shooting. And so depending on the circumstances of the area, like in Phoenix metropolitan area, we have some really bad neighborhoods where, yeah, your chances of getting a shooting are a lot higher, you would think. But in fact, I worked in a precinct in the city of Phoenix that had the highest shootings, but was perceived like one of the most safest areas, which it defies logic. So it doesn't even really matter what environment you live in. Here in a rural area, in a metropolitan area, you have response like backup, literally sometimes 1, 2, 3 minutes. In a rural environment, your backup could be a half hour sometimes. It depends on how spread out it is. But so you handle a lot of calls on your own, and you go on routine calls on your own, not domestic violence. Those are always required 2 officers, but you did a lot of calls by yourself. And so you could approach a situation where by the time you realize things are going bad, it's too late, and it's just you. And it sounds kind of like that was a situation here. It was rural, a disabled vehicle. He went out to figure out the situation, and things went bad really fast.
Exactly. I want you to talk a little bit about, because I even think about, my own background in military, and obviously while there's some parallels, there's some differences and stuff like that too. And you even mentioned that with one of the organizations you're working with, they recently put you and your team through response-related training. So talking about, if an incident happens and that sort of thing. And we did a lot of this stuff in the military as well. So I'm curious what some of the training is, that these officers and others go through with response to this type of situation, so that in every case possible, they're doing as much as possible to preserve life when somebody is injured in a situation. Visit about that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the corporations I do a lot of work with had some active shooter training, and just to practice different events. And then also I attended myself some training in January of this year. It was called Stop the Bleed, and it was for active shooting type situations, because what they've discovered, if you look at active shooters in the scenes, most individuals die from bleeding out, and they find out that if the bleeding could have been stopped, even while the situation is very dynamic and there's officers trying to engage an active shooter, if even basic, like civilians had basic training on stopping bleeding, a lot more lives would be saved because of the bleeding out factor. So we received training in tourniquets, and there was actually an option to purchase tourniquets that were real inexpensive. And if you didn't have a tourniquet, there was training provided that showed how you can use shirts and just common household or things accessible wherever you are to stop the bleeding. And if you stop the bleeding, most likely you're going to save that person's life, depending on where the shots are fired. Obviously, if it's an extremity where it's bleeding, it's a major artery, there's a high likelihood you can save somebody by stopping the bleeding. And very basic training, and I would say very effective for people to know, because you don't know when you're going to be in a situation. Exactly, that's the course right there. And it it, uh, it opened my eyes because I do active shooter training, I do situational awareness training, but I haven't dove deep into the cause of death. Obviously, it's blood loss, right? A lot
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, but even going to this training, I realized, wow, there's an opportunity for people to learn a basic skill of applying a tourniquet and saving lives if there's an active shooter before law enforcement can get to all the victims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's it opened my eyes, and it's something I think everybody should look at.
So when we're talking about things not being routine in law enforcement, Kyle had a list up here earlier of the number of law enforcement that have actually died so far this year in the line of duty, and the causes are all over the map. I mean, they can be heart attack, they can be traffic-related situations. If you would, Kyle, bring that site up and show those in the background, because our deputy from this area is the most recent one on this list. But visit about this a little bit, if you would, Darin.
So if you look at the top, it shows so far there's been 33 deaths this year recorded, and you look at the cause of death, and you can see obviously gunfire stands out at 14.
Mm-hmm.
And then struck by vehicle accidents are obviously another top killer of law enforcement. But then you look further down and you look, and there's some threes there, right? And there's heart attack, and I don't laugh about it, but the reason officers die of heart attacks usually is because of the occupation, where you're basically, like I said, there's no routine traffic stop, no routine call. You're actually operating, if you're a good officer, you're operating in a higher sense of awareness. Mm-hmm. And they call it like yellow, orange in mm-hmm. the spectrum. Red it means things are going really bad, really fast. Red, you don't operate in, your body can't handle it. Orange is very stressful in the body. So officers operate in a yellow stage, yellow to orange, while they're on their shifts the entire time, to stay safe, to be aware, mm-hmm. to be really cognizant of what's going on. And so that leads to a very unhealthy lifestyle. If you take working hours of graveyard shifts, shift twos, working weekends, working crazy hours, having basically your body go up and down and up and down and up and down. There's cortisone being released in the body. A lot of times officers aren't eating good, they're not exercising good. And thus you have, and according to this so far this year, that's the third leading cause of deaths for law enforcement is heart attacks, which is tied with, what's the other one up there?
Automobile crashes. Yeah.
But so it's kind of if you look at it from twofold, to operate at a safe level, law enforcement has to be very aware of what's going on, which then creates stress on the body. But if they don't operate at that level, then they're more prone to becoming injured and killed because they're not doing their job in a safe way. And so what law enforcement needs to do is, first of all, not become complacent. And mm-hmm. that's what they stress in the academy is nothing's routine. Don't ever become complacent, because that's when something's going to happen. But this also stresses the importance of a healthy lifestyle, which for 30 years or longer, I've tried to maintain a healthy lifestyle. That's not just about trying to look good, and it's about reducing stress. And if mm-hmm. I don't get my gym days in, give me a week or two, and I'm going to be a very ornery person and a very unhealthy person, just because I'm still in the job I do right now with what I'm doing. My risk of getting killed or shot or injured is lower, but the stress level is definitely still there. So, it's 33 this year. It's 33 too many, but it shows the danger of the occupation as well.
Exactly. Well, on the bottom, if you would, Kyle, take us down to the bottom of this list here, because looking at what's happening just on a national basis around the country, our local deputy, Justin DeRosier, is the most recent one on this list. So very real situation for people here locally. I noticed they also have some canines down there too, so mm-hmm. dogs that have died in the line of duty. But as you can see, this was Sunday, April 14th, 2019. This was probably just a few minutes after midnight, a little short time after midnight that he passed away. But you show there, bring that up. It shows bio, 29 years of age, 6 years in the service. Very unfortunate deal.
No, it is real unfortunate. I think he left a baby, a 5-month-old.
5-month-old baby, yeah.
A baby, yeah. No, it's it affects the family, and yeah, it's sad when this happens.
You know, the interesting thing was, or a very cool thing rather, I was leaving Longview late in the day yesterday from the south side of town, and I crossed the overpass going over the highway. Fire trucks all the way across the highway were on the overpass, and more firemen than you could count out there on the bridge in a very rainy day, headed to go north. Same thing on the next overpass, just north of town there. Again, trucks, first responders, etc., all the way across that. Probably 200 firefighters, first responders, etc., standing on the overpass, and they brought him home yesterday. And I went by the event center here in Longview, and it would have been a bad day to be doing something wrong at the event center. There's probably I don't know, just a guess, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100, 200 squad cars, SUVs, etc. there. So they came from everywhere to pay some respects to Deputy DeRozier yesterday.
Yep, it affects the brotherhood of law enforcement, affects the personal family, and it affects the community. So it's a sad day. It doesn't matter where you are in the country. When it happens, it's unfortunate.
All right, well, appreciate your time today, Darin. I realize you're out of time. You got places to go, things to do. I appreciate everybody who joined us here on the broadcast, talking about law enforcement, and that there's nothing routine in the duty that these men and women go out and do on our behalf. Kevin Hunter here at Kyle Torgerson at the broadcast desk, and of course Darin Fredickson joining us remotely. As always, thanks everybody who joined us on the broadcast. Take care.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text to 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.